Wonders video. I have been experimenting with my Fineline Paint Applicators, well, thinking about them. I do want to call your attention to something. I washed these out the other day. I gave them a really good bath in Murphy's oil soap. But I've come to the conclusion about something, and I just kind of want to bring it up here. It's okay to wash out the bottles in Murphy's oil soap. You can see this one, it was washed out, but I'm going to have to get a pipe stem cleaner or something in there to get out everything in there. But it's good enough for what I want to use. I'm going to fill it in this video. However, I want to point out something. If you use Murphy's oil soap to clean your Fineline Paint Applicators, and I'm only talking about the Fineline Paint Applicators here, they're one of my favorite art tools, I'm going to caution you about something. These Fineline Paint Applicators have a nozzle, and this part of it tells you whether it's an 18 gauge, which is orange, or a 20 gauge, which is blue. The 20 gauge is a finer gauge. And as you can see, this little pipe thing is held right in there. And I'm not sure exactly how it's held in there. I don't know that much about the manufacture of them, but I have an idea that it may be held in there with some type of a glue or epoxy. I've been having trouble with my Fineline Paint Applicators since I gave them that really nice bath in Murphy's oil soap. Let me show you this one. I had trouble this morning with the white one, and I took it in there and was cleaning it, and I think that whatever was holding this little round steel nozzle where the paint flows from, I think that the Murphy's oil soap might have, perhaps, I'm not sure, dissolved the glue or wore it down enough that when I was cleaning it, it just pushed. I think the nozzle is down inside of the paint here. That little steel nozzle, I think it fell right down in here. I'd have to dump everything out, and I'm not going to do it. I can still use this, but it will give me a really, really thick line. I will show you on the back of this jelly printed paper. I can still use this. Paint will still flow from here, but it'll be a really, really thick line. I mean, this will probably be like your 5 gauge. So I'm gonna use up my paint here, but it's not exactly what it was designed for. So this is just a fair warning. Be careful what you use when you clean the nozzles. I think that I ran into some problems here. So I'm just going to put this right back in here. This won't even go, well, yeah, it'll go down some. So, with that said, I'm not unhappy with it. As long as I can still get paint out of it, I'm happy. But it is something. I will continue to wash out the bottles in Murphy's oil soap, but I will not wash out the nozzles. If you're going to wash out the nozzles, rinse them out with water, take a thin wire, or I use a needle, and I put it through up and down through this little pipe and kind of clean out whatever's inside of that little nozzle there. Run this under water, and if you're going to soak them in a mild soap and water. Don't soak them in something that possibly may have dissolved the glue. I really think that's kind of what happened. And when you think about it, Murphy's oil soap, when you have a really stiff paintbrush and you let that soak overnight, that Murphy's oil soap will loosen all that gunk. And I think that's what happened with this nozzle. I think it just loosened whatever was holding that little piece in there that held this nozzle. So some of you may not care but it's something to be aware of. Now I have this as a Fineline Paint Applicator, and it is a 20 gauge, which means it's tiny, tiny, tiny. And here is my Meri Wonders. I'm wondering how acrylic ink will flow in one of these Fineline Paint Applicators. Now this is a tiny gauge. It won't be like writing with a ballpoint pen, but this is still an acrylic-based ink. So I am going to hopefully not spill this. Just in case. I'm going to take, this is an extra bottle of gray ink. I'm going to empty it. This is, I don't know how many milliliters of ink, but it looks like it might fit in here. This is about 1.5 ounces, and I doubt that this is much more than that. Let's shake this up. Good. Oh, it turned a light gray. I don't know if I want a light gray. I was expecting more of a dark gray. I'm going to find a different color of ink. It's interesting. You always want to shake up your inks. That turned a lighter gray than what I thought it was. So I'm going to keep that. This is indigo. So this is a pretty blue color, which is good too. And I'm sure I have several blue colors. So I'm hoping that I can pour this. I'm just going to try it a little. Yes. I'm going to put this in my Fineline Paint Applicator. I filled it about halfway full. I'm not going to fill it all the way full until I see what happens. Let's put the lid on it. You want, when you have a liquid like this, you want to be sure you have it secure there or it'll leak out. Now you stop and think about it. Acrylic inks have an acrylic base, and I usually use a craft paint in these, which is acrylic paint, so it should work fine. Okay, I can see, I scratched some up above my desk here. I can see something already. One thing with the Fineline Paint Applicators is when you put your nozzle down, there's always a drop that wants to come out at first. So I'm expecting that to happen. I want to just do some writing. Let's see, let's just write some words. See, there's the drop there. So it does write. Now let's see if I can write it smaller. If you get too small with this, it tends to blur those letters. Now let's try, I'm more interested in the writing than in the drawing, but I suppose you could do flourishes with this. Let's do some flourishes. Let's start out with the drop, since it wants to drop. And let's just do some, it really wants to drop. And it comes out fast and furious. Guess I could put dots. I'm not sure that's such a pretty one, but it's just experimenting. I kind of like the lines that it's making once I get going with it, but I always expect that first initial drop on it. It makes nice dots. It makes nice dots. It'd be fun to embellish with. This is acrylic ink. I would not want to go with a regular ink that you would put in a fountain pen with regular ink, because that's even going to be thinner than this. Your acrylic ink has an acrylic base to it, which makes it a little bit thicker than, and it's still flowing through here, probably more than what I can control. But it's fun to do. Now I'm going, what can I do with this other than make some flourishes and write some big words? I don't think I would go, see it, and I guess it would be nice for splatters if you wanted to make, you know, I call these drop splatters or splatter drops. You know, you could just do this. That's fun if you're doing a Pick 10. I would not go any smaller than this medium-sized word if you're writing. You try to get, and this, my smallest word here, probably, if I had to compare it to a point size, it's probably about a 48 point size right here. This is probably 100 and something. Let's clean the nozzle off. So unless you're writing big words and you have control of what's flowing out of here, I'm not sure that even the 20 gauge is the answer to doing this. I think you can get smaller yet gauge nozzles. I have not experimented with that. I just buy retail, and that's the 20 gauge fine and the 18 gauge standard. Well, let's see what else I can do with this. How about doing some... Oh, and here's the other thing. Look at how that oozed out. When this oozed out here, I was pressing on this. So you do not want to, you don't want to press very hard on something like this. And for those of you that have wrist issues and hand issues, this would not be hard for you to control as far as getting ink out. It'd probably be harder to control, like the splatters and the initial dots. Now those initial dots I think can be kind of fun because you can do something like this. And you can take advantage of how thick these are into a design. Now I'm getting, this is awfully wet. And I'm working on watercolor paper. Let's just turn it, let's turn it sideways. Yeah. And let's play off of that, let's play off of this design here. I kind of like what's going on there. And I'm going to wipe my nozzle clean again here. But let's see what I can do. Let's drop, and whoops, drop and pull. Drop and pull, drop and pull. Now this might not look like anything, and it really isn't. It's Meri experimenting. It's Meri wondering how this ink, this FW acrylic ink, will work in a 20 gauge Fineline Paint Applicator. And I like some things. I do like what's going on there. Those are swirls. Let's see if I can do some other things. Drop and pull, drop and pull, drop and pull. You see, I got that dot at the beginning and at the end. You do not need to put much pressure on this to get ink out. It flows out. Let's try some loops. Let's try a, you'll want to keep a towel handy. Let's try a padded flower. Oops. See, once you get going with it, but I'm talking to myself, I'm telling me not to put much pressure on that bottle. If I put the slightest amount of pressure on this, it's going to ooze that ink out. I'm going to let this ink drip. Just let it drip across my page, just for the fun of it. I'll probably go back in. No, I think I'll probably I'll use this as an experiment page. In fact, I should just write on here. Acrylic ink in 20 gauge fine liner. I have different feelings about this. This ink is very liquidy, very, very liquidy. I hardly have to put pressure at all on that bottle to get something out. I like the dots. I like what's going on here. I think you can take advantage of that initial dot that falls and kind of draw it in. You could draw it down maybe. Draw it out. So this just kind of shows you what can happen with ink in a Fineline paint applicator. And I suppose if you work fast enough, you're ahead of those drops. So it might just take some practice. I'm going to set this aside. We'll let that dry. And I'm just going to work on some composition paper just to play. Because I just want to see what these can do. So I like the tatting, and I wish that if I could work fast enough. Here's one thing I found. If I use and this may not be a good, let's get this one because it's already folded up. If I start off on another piece and drag it this way, then I've got that initial drop off on another piece. So I'm going to try that. So here comes my drop, and I'm just going to pull it that way. I got a little drop there, but that's not too bad. Now it's harder to make the smaller loops, so I'm just going to put drops for my smaller loops here on my tatting. That's easier to do rather than try to draw a loop, because I'm not even pressing on this and that ink is flowing out. It just wants to flow out. But it's kind of pretty. Now, why would you do this versus something else? Because you're curious. I probably wouldn't. I would probably get out a marker or an ink pen, but I just want to see how this works in here. I could see the advantage in doing this. I think it does a nice job of the drips. I just call this a drippy dots. Well, I have to press a little on that. Come on. So it does a nice job with random dots. I am finding that I need some pressure in there, and I don't know if it's because it feels like I got a lot in there. I'm wondering what's going on inside of there. Let's see, what else can I do here? How about some leaves? Can we do leaves? See that's awfully thick ink. That's really flowing out of there. Now let's play with this technique where you make the dot and then you pull it. Make the dot and pull it, like little kisses almost. Hershey kisses or claws. But make the dot and pull it this way. I'm just trying to think of different things that I could do with this. I've kind of discounted writing with it, unless you write really large. I like that drippy dot. How about doing some pulls like this? That's really wet in the center. Let's see if I can do a drippy dot and just, whoops, I wanted to pull out there. I kind of like that. Okay. Let's turn it this way. And let's see if I can draw. Just draw some eyes and a nose and see what happens there. Not too bad if you're drawing large. Here again, I don't think you could draw a small detail with it. Whoops. Oh, that's a scary eye, isn't it? Draw that way and let's give it a... So, what are my conclusions on this? My conclusions is that it might be fun for a Pic 10 where you're just doing the dots, you know, splatter dots. Or if you want to do something fancy like this. This one's not quite as pretty. I guess I can pretty it up a little. The leaves aren't really that great. I think I could work on them a little more. But my conclusion is that these that it's probably just as simple and as easy and least expensive to put regular craft paint in your Fineline Paint Applicator. This is almost too thin for a 20 gauge. The acrylic inks, this is De La Rowney acrylic ink. It's almost too thin for the 20 gauge Fineline Paint Applicator to do anything. I mean, I do not recommend writing unless you're going to write large. You can write large with it, but writing smaller, the ink wants to blur into each other. See, like that. It'd be okay if you want to do scribble writing. So it would be okay to do something like, whoa, like this maybe. And even then, I'm not sure, because I'm just really letting that ink flow out. Almost too much. To me, that's way too much ink to, all of this is way too much ink to use on a page. I could find better ways to use my ink. So, I probably will not be putting a lot of ink in my Fineline Paint Applicators unless I can get a tiny, 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 tiny one. This is tiny, tiny. I have to get one that's probably a 50 gauge. So there you go. Meri wonders what will happen if you put acrylic ink in a Fineline Paint Applicator. I don't think I'll be doing it much. But you need to experiment with your art media and with your art supplies to see what happens. Thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next page.